let's start this deep dive with a scenario that might sound a little too familiar to you.
Yeah, imagine you just got like a $4,000 raise at work. You are celebrating. You're thinking you're finally getting ahead, right? But by the end of the year, you look at your bank account and realize you can actually afford fewer things than before. And surprisingly, your tax bill just spiked. How did getting paid more actually make you poorer?
Welcome to the Missing Lessons, where we explain what school never did. In this deep dive, we're unpacking the invisible thief living in everyone's wallet. It dictates whether you can afford groceries, whether you can buy a house, or, how you save for the future. Yet most people fundamentally misunderstand how it works. That thief is inflation.
If you're enjoying the Missing Lessons, make sure to follow the podcast, leave a rating, and share it with someone who might find it interesting. It helps us create more episodes and reach more curious minds. So let's unpack this invisible thief, because when most of us hear the word inflation, we just think it means things are getting more expensive. But that's not exactly the whole story, is it?
It's really not. We tend to use the word inflation as this catch-all term for any time prices go up. But that is a massive misconception. True inflation is purely about the money supply. It's a monetary phenomenon. It happens when the amount of money in the system increases, but the actual amount of goods and services in the real world doesn't change at all.
Right. So the stuff stays the same, but the cash multiplies.
Exactly. To visualize this, imagine a closed video game economy. Like an online multiplayer game.
Oh, sure.
So let's say there are exactly 100 digital swords in this game, and the players have a total of 1,000 gold coins. The economy settles, and each sword naturally costs 10 coins.
Okay, 10 coins a sword. Makes sense.
Right. Now imagine the game developers push an update that suddenly drops another 1,000 gold coins into the players' inventories, but they don't add any new swords. You now have 2,000 coins chasing the exact same 100 swords.
So the price of a sword is going to organically double to 20 coins.
You got it. The sword didn't get better. It didn't become intrinsically more valuable. The currency simply became weaker because there was more of it floating around.
That makes a lot of sense when you isolate it like that. But what about when something specific just, shoots up in price? Remember a few years ago when there was that massive hack on the Colonial Pipeline?
Yeah.
Gas stations were running dry, and in some places, gas temporarily spiked to insane highs. People were acting like it was $16 a gallon.
Yeah.
Was that inflation?
No, and that is a perfect example of what inflation isn't. That gas price spike had absolutely nothing to do with the total supply of money in the United States. That was simply a localized supply cutoff, a major pipeline shutdown. Gas became physically scarce overnight, and the price skyrocketed because the supply collapsed while people still, needed to drive.
Right, they still had to get to work.
Exactly. And once the pipeline was fixed and the gas flowed again, the price came back down. That is just basic supply and demand in action.
So if my favorite sneakers get crazy expensive because of a limited drop, that's just supply and demand. There are only a few pairs, everyone wants them. But if the price of everything like sneakers, groceries, rent, car repairs goes up because the government printed more money and stimulus checks were chasing too few goods, that is inflation.
You hit the nail on the head. When it's everything across the board, you are looking at currency devaluation, you are looking at true inflation. And we also have to separate it from the opposite effect, which is things getting cheaper due to technology.
Oh, like TVs and stuff?
Yeah, think about computers and smartphones. They get cheaper and exponentially faster every single year. A phone today can do 100 times more than a phone from 10 years ago, and it costs relatively less for that computing power. That isn't deflation, that is just technological progress.
Because they just figured out how to make the parts better.
Right. Engineers figured out how to make microchips smaller and more efficient, bringing the cost of production down. Again, that has absolutely nothing to do with the money supply.
Okay, so if inflation is a systemic problem with the currency itself, someone has to be at the wheel, right? I mean, the money doesn't just print itself. Who is actually controlling this?
Well, in the United States, the puppeteer of the money supply is the Federal Reserve. And here is where it gets really interesting and, frankly, a little shocking to most people. The Federal Reserve actually wants a little bit of inflation.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it is their stated intentional goal. They aim for an inflation rate of around 2% over the long term. In fact, if you look at the last 25 years, it has averaged about 2.7%. They do not want prices to stay perfectly flat, and they certainly don't want them to go down.
Why on earth would the government want our money to lose value? I mean, if my money buys less every year, how is that a good thing for anyone? As a shopper, I would love it if things got cheaper every year. Deflation sounds amazing.
I know. For a shopper in the short term, deflation sounds like a total dream. But for a macroeconomy, deflation is a complete nightmare. It signals a dying, stalling economy. Economists look at a slow, gradual 2% inflation rate as a sort of Goldilocks balance, not too hot, not too cold.
Okay, but how does things getting cheaper ruin the economy?
Well, here is the underlying logic of the deflationary death spiral. Think about human psychology. If you know for a fact that a new car or a new house or even like a new refrigerator is going to be 10% cheaper next year, what do?
I wait. I would buy it today.
Exactly, you wait. And if everyone waits, demand across the entire country drops to zero. Companies can't sell their products, so their revenue dries up completely. To survive, they have to cut production. To cut production, they have to lay off workers.
Oh, wow. So people lose their jobs just because everyone is waiting for a discount.
Yes. Suddenly, millions of people lose their jobs, which means they have even less money to spend, which drives demand down even further. It becomes this vicious downward spiral that is incredibly hard to stop once it starts. So the Federal Reserve views a small, predictable 2% inflation rate as a buffer against that collapse.
I see. It's like a gentle nudge to get people to spend their money now.
Right. It nudges you to spend or invest your money today, knowing it will be worth slightly less next year.
Okay, I see the logic there. A little bit of inflation keeps the gears turning. But what happens when that 2% turns into 5 or 8 or even higher, like we saw in the 1970s oil shocks or the years right after 2020? How does the Federal Reserve actually pull the currency back in line?
That is where the Federal Reserve uses its primary weapon, which is interest rates. By raising interest rates, they intentionally make borrowing money more expensive. Think of a booming economy like a wildly popular nightclub.
Okay, I'm with you.
When there's too much money floating around, the club is packed. People are buying out the bar, the bartender can't keep up with the demand, so the club owner just keeps raising the price of the drinks. That is inflation. The Federal Reserve's job is to cool that room down.
So how do they do that?
Raising interest rates is like the bouncer stepping outside and suddenly doubling the cover charge to get in.
Oh, yeah.
It mechanically forces people to turn around and go home. In the real world, this chain reaction is brutal but highly effective.
Because loans just get too expensive.
Exactly. The Fed raises rates and suddenly business loans become incredibly expensive. A company looks at those high rates and decides not to build that new warehouse. Because they aren't building, they freeze hiring and don't take on those 50 new construction workers.
And then those 50 workers don't have the extra money to go spend at the nightclub, so to speak.
Precisely. They aren't buying new TVs or going out to dinner. The total demand in the economy drops, the club empties out a bit, and businesses are forced to lower their prices, or at least stop raising them just to attract whatever tight wallets are left.
Have you ever noticed this in your own life? Have you ever put off buying a car or a house because the loan rates were suddenly just way too high? That wasn't a coincidence. That was the Federal Reserve intentionally cooling off your demand to stabilize prices.
It's harsh medicine, but it's the main mechanism they use to bring widespread inflation back down to that 2% target.
This all paints a very clear macro picture. But let's bring it back down to the individual. I want to jump back to that paradox from the very beginning of this deep dive. The $4,000 raise that actually makes you poorer. How does this 2% inflation secretly drain your wealth, even if you are getting pay bumps?
Right, this brings us to one of the most insidious effects of inflation, a concept known as bracket creep. It essentially acts as a stealth tax. Here's how it works. Over 40 states in the U.S. tax your wage income, but nearly half of the states fail to adjust their tax brackets, standard deductions, or personal exemptions for inflation.
So they just leave the numbers the exact same year after year.
Yes, they leave the math exactly the same, regardless of what the currency is actually worth in the real world. Let's walk through the math on this deliberately, because this is the exact trap millions of young professionals fall into.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine it's 2019. You are fresh out of school, and you land a job making $60,000. You are surviving, paying your rent, buying groceries. Then, in 2020, inflation hits hard, but your boss is great and gives you a raise to keep up with the cost of living. So now your salary is $64,000.
Nice. You'd feel pretty proud of a $4,000 bump.
You would. But because of inflation, that $64,000 buys the exact same amount of stuff that your old $60,000 used to buy. Your actual real purchasing power hasn't changed by a single penny. You are merely treading water.
So you have a higher number of dollars in your bank account, but those dollars are fundamentally weaker.
Right. However, the state government doesn't care about your purchasing power. They don't look at what your money can actually buy. They only look at the raw number on your W-2. Because your state didn't adjust its tax brackets for inflation, that extra $4,000 pushes your total income over an invisible line into a higher tax bracket.
Oh, I see where this is going.
So let's say your top marginal tax rate jumps from 5.55% to 6.6%. Because of that structural jump, you just paid $264 more in real taxes to the state.
Wait, so even though my real wealth didn't increase at all, and I'm just buying the exact same groceries and paying the exact same rent, the government taxes me like I'm a richer person. They are basically taxing an illusion of wealth.
That is exactly what bracket creep is. It means inflation isn't just some abstract concept or a metaphor for a hidden tax. It is a very literal mathematical tax that penalizes you for merely surviving.
That is incredibly frustrating. It feels like the system is just rigged against the people trying to get their footing. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of society, it explains why inflation hurts certain groups more than others.
It does. Economists refer to inflation as a regressive tax. That means it disproportionately hurts the poorest members of society, young people just starting out, and those living on fixed incomes like retirees.
Because wealthy people have their money tied up in other things.
Exactly. If you are wealthy, you probably own assets. You own real estate, you own stocks, you own businesses. When inflation happens and the currency devalues, the raw dollar value of those physical assets naturally goes up, which protects you.
But if you just have cash in a checking account,
Yeah, if you are working an entry-level job or you are living off a fixed pension, you don't have a massive portfolio of assets. You just have cash. And that cash is losing value every single day. You are forced to burn through your savings just to afford the same basic standard of living. It literally transfers wealth away from the poor and middle class.
that's rough.
And beyond the societal unfairness, inflation also ruins the entire nervous system of the economy by destroying price signals. In a healthy economy, prices are not just numbers on a tag. They are crucial information signals. They are the way millions of people communicate with each other.
What do you mean by communication? Like between a buyer and a seller?
Yes, on a massive scale. If
Wow.
we go back to the Colonial Pipeline example, when gas hits $16 a gallon, that high price is sending a vital signal to society. It's saying, gas is incredibly scarce right now. Conserve this resource. Do not drive unless it is an absolute emergency. It tells producers to rush more gas to the area, and it tells consumers to stay home.
So the price is essentially a text message to the entire country about the reality of a resource.
That's a great way to put it, yes. But inflation creates fake price signals. Let's say the price of lumber doubles, not because more people are building houses, but just because the government printed way too much money. A lumber company might look at that high price and think, wow, demand for houses is booming. We need to chop down more forests, buy 10 new trucks, and hire 100 new guys. They make massive long-term investments based on a fake signal.
And then what happens when they realize it was fake?
Disaster. When reality sets in and they realize the genuine demand wasn't there, those resources have been wasted. In economics, this is called malinvestment. It acts like static on a radio dial, making it impossible for anyone to hear the actual music. And that leads to wasted human effort, time, and materials.
So how do we fix the static? If inflation is this destructive, what is the solution on a structural level to keep those price signals accurate?
The fix is that inflation must be completely predictable, and the money supply needs to be tethered to reality. Society can only stay stable if everyday people and businesses can accurately plan for the future. One major concept economists propose is called nominal GDP targeting.
Nominal GDP targeting. That sounds a bit dense. How does that actually work?
It's actually pretty straightforward mechanically. Imagine the entire economy produces 100 apples a year, and there are exactly $100 in existence. Each apple costs $1.
Okay, keeping the math simple. I like it.
Next year, thanks to better farming technology, the economy grows and produces 103 apples. So a 3% growth in real goods. Nominal GDP targeting means the central bank is only allowed to add exactly 3 new dollars into the system.
Oh, so the money supply grows at the exact same pace as the real world's output.
You got it. It keeps the ratio perfectly stable, 1 to 1. It gives the Federal Reserve strict, mathematically predictable rules rather than letting them guess how much to hit the gas or the brakes. If the money supply is stable, people can plan their futures, negotiate fair wages, and companies don't waste billions on malinvestment.
That sounds like a brilliant system, but, we don't control the Federal Reserve. The average listener to this deep dive, especially someone between 16 and 25 who is just starting to build their life, they can't just walk into Washington and change monetary policy. So how can you, the person listening right now, actively defend yourself? How can you become wealthier and protect your money despite inflation?
That is the absolute most important takeaway here. You have to take control of your own financial defense, and you have to be strategic about it. First, you need to own equities.
By equities, you mean the stock market.
Yes, investing in the stock market, specifically in companies that have strong purchasing power. If you own a piece of a company that makes a product everyone genuinely needs, let's say toothpaste, utilities, or, critical software when inflation hits, that company can simply pass the higher costs on to the consumer.
Because people still need toothpaste no matter what.
Exactly. They raise their prices, their revenue goes up in dollar terms, and the value of your stock goes up with it. You are riding the inflation wave instead of being crushed underneath it.
Okay, that makes sense for stocks. But what if you were looking for something a bit safer than the stock market? Something that physically guarantees your money won't lose value?
Then you should definitely look into TPS. That stands for Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. These are government bonds, but they have a built-in defense mechanism that standard bonds don't have.
How do they work?
Let's say you buy a standard bond for $1,000. It pays you a fixed interest rate. If inflation goes crazy, the value of that $1,000 drops and you lose purchasing power. But with TPS, the actual physical principal amount that you invested goes up with the inflation rate.
Wait, so the government actually adds money to your principal?
Yes. So if inflation is 5%, your $1,000 principal legally becomes $1,050. And your interest payments are calculated based on that new, higher number. The government is contractually obligated to bump up your balance so your purchasing power stays exactly the same.
That is incredibly practical. But what about that bracket creep we talked about earlier? How does a young professional defend against the stealth tax when they are just starting their career?
This requires proactive tax and career planning. First, when you are negotiating your starting salary for a new job or asking for your annual raise, do not just blindly accept a standard 3% bump if real inflation is sitting at 5%.
Because then you're just taking a pay cut.
Technically, yes. You have to bring the actual inflation numbers to the negotiation table. If you don't secure a raise that at least matches inflation, your purchasing power is shrinking.
What about the tax side of it?
Second, utilize tax-advantaged accounts aggressively, specifically a Roth IRA. If you are in the 16 to 25 age bracket, you are likely in the lowest tax bracket you will ever be in for the rest of your life.
Right, because you're just starting out.
A Roth IRA lets you pay taxes on your money right now at your current low rate, and then that money grows completely tax-free forever. Even as inflation pushes nominal numbers up and bracket creep tries to snare you later in life, the money in that Roth IRA is shielded. You are locking in your low tax rate today to protect your wealth tomorrow.
Here's a question for you. If you were in charge of the economy, would you aim for 2% inflation, 0 inflation, or deflation, where things get cheaper but jobs might be at risk? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.
To summarize today's missing lesson, inflation is not just expensive groceries or gas. It is a fundamental shift in the money supply that alters vital economic signals, wastes human resources, acts as a brutal regressive tax on the poorest among us, and secretly pushes you into higher tax brackets without making you any richer. And I want to leave you with a somewhat sobering thought to chew on.
Let's hear it.
When you watch the news and financial experts say that inflation has finally normalized or that they have defeated inflation, it does not mean prices are going back down to what they used to be 3 years ago. It simply means prices are growing at a slower, manageable pace. That expensive carton of eggs, that higher rent. Unless there is massive, unforeseen technological innovation, those prices are likely the new permanent reality. The water level rose, and it isn't draining back out.
If you enjoyed this episode of The Missing Lessons, don't forget to follow the podcast, leave a rating, and share it with a friend. Your support helps us continue exploring the topics school never taught us. Until next time, keep questioning the signals and protect your purchasing power.